For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited trainings.
Hello, and welcome to the Snow Brains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a professional mountain guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of Snow Brains, and to celebrate my 21st birthday, I drove out to Colorado with a buddy and climbed up 14,000-foot peaks in a month. And on the night of my 21st birthday, I got simply destroyed by the volcano cocktail at a bar called Kay's China, and I very gracefully slept in a gutter in Boulder, Colorado. The Snow Brains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area. 8.5%? Nope, we ain't talking about beer. We're talking about the average density of Alta snow, the density that provides perfect powder flotation. My guest today is Adrian Ballinger. Adrian's list of accomplishments, it's over the top. It's too much. So we're just gonna do some career highlights. I'm just gonna list them off here in rapid fire style. So he's the first person to ski 8,000 plus meter Monsalu from the summit, which is the sixth highest peak in the world. He's the only American with 3 complete 8,000 meter ski descents. He has 8 summits of Mount Everest, and he spent 13 seasons on Mount Everest, and he's gotten over 100 clients to the top of Mount Everest as a guide. He has 17 total 8,000 meter peak summits, 6 total 8,000 meter peak ski attempts. He summited Everest twice within 3 weeks on 2 separate occasions. He's guided or led more than 150 international expeditions. He's the founder of Alpenglow Expeditions, an awesome guiding service based in Lake Tahoe, California. And Adrian has also guided on Kilimanjaro in Africa 14 times by 4 different routes, Denali in Alaska by the West Rib, Alpamayo in Peru 14 times via 3 different routes, Cotopaxi in Ecuador over 30 times, and many other expeditions on many other high peaks all over the world. Hello, Adrian. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here. How are you, man?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. It's stoked we finally get to do this.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate you and you taking the time today. So you're in Southern Utah. I'm in Jackson Hole in Motel 6. You're in an Airbnb. I love that.
Exactly.
So,
I'm actually on a little climbing break from ski season, waiting for things to kind of fill in at home. And it's a lot of fun down here.
And home for you and me, part-time at least for me, is Lake Tahoe. And when did you ski last?
Skied like 5 days ago. So I was home over the holidays, was pretty much out every day, kind of splitting between being at the resort at Squaw and then in the backcountry and just try to get a little fitness again.
God, aren't we all? I feel like I surfed all summer. And so I'm still, struggling. Today was day 50 for me too. And I still am weak. But,
oh, wow. You're way ahead of me.
I have a problem though. I'm a bit fanatical of late and I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't go home for Christmas because of COVID. So here I am. So let's jump into it. Adrian, many of your feats are so big and sort of grandiose and so far outside the normal bounds of human mentality. It's easy for people not to understand them well. So that's really my goal today, is to give them a handle on what you've been doing with your life, which is so unique.
Great.
So we'll start with some rapid fire questions and then we're going to drill down into some of your bigger stuff.
I'll do my best.
If you had to choose between mountain climbing or skiing, which would you pick?
Skiing. That's easy.
Oh, I did not expect that. I love it.
Well, we
All
can
right.
get more into the non-rapid fire.
I love it. What's your biggest accomplishment in skiing?
I have skied 3 8,000 meter peak descents, complete ski descents from 8,000 meter peaks.
And we'll get into that more. Which ones were they?
Cho-Oyu, the 6th tallest mountain in the world. I've actually made 2 complete ski descents of Cho-Oyu.
Wow.
And then I was the first person to ski the 8th tallest peak called Manaslu from its summit.
That's incredible. And so just for our users or for our listeners, 8,000 meters is about 26,000 feet. So very, very high. What's your biggest accomplishment in climbing?
Summiting Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world, and K2, the 2nd tallest peak in the world without supplemental oxygen.
Absolutely mind-boggling. And again, we'll get into that more too. And what do you think is your biggest accomplishment in life?
Shoot, God, I want two.
You can have two.
Persuading Emily Harrington to say yes to marrying me, my partner of the last 9 years. We actually got engaged during COVID. And it's just been so amazing at, 44 years of age to find my partner and commit and lock it in. Feels really good.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Second one is starting Alpenglow Expeditions, this little guide company back in 2004 when I was like valet parking cars and catering parties in Aspen where I was living. And I'd worked for a lot of the guide companies and nothing was quite what I wanted. And I started it. And today, we're teaching a few thousand people to climb in Tahoe, climb and ski, and then running almost 40 international expeditions a year, except for 2020.
Simply unbelievable. And we will get more into that too. I think one of the stats I read is that you've gotten 100 clients to the summit of Everest also, which is just ridiculous.
That's over 13 years on Everest. Yeah.
Geez. Where's your favorite place to ski?
I mean, home, Tahoe. I could live anywhere in the world and run my business, and I chose Tahoe for a variety of reasons. One of the main ones being it's not the most rowdy place in the planet. I spent a bunch of years living in Chamonix and Le Grave, and those are two of my very favorite places on the planet to ski. But I decided I didn't want to be in that environment all day, every day, both guiding and skiing for myself.
And where do you think is your favorite place to climb?
It's got to be the Himalaya. So Nepal, Tibet, Pakistan, the big stuff.
That's what I expected. And so if you had to pick, your top handful of favorite mountain ranges, what might those be?
I actually just went to the Karakoram in Pakistan for the first time in 2019. I kind of avoided it for 2 decades, and I completely fell in love with the rowdiness, the size, the technical nature of it. So that's really high up there. I'd say Peru, like the Andes, it's specifically in Peru for the same reason. They're so jagged, not at all like rounded volcanoes. Like they are technical rock and ice and things like that. And then I love the Sierra really for the same reason, right? Like the Sierra as compared to a lot of Colorado 14ers and things like that. They're just like jagged and rowdy, and there's a lot of rock as well as snow, and I love both. And
full disclosure, I'm also a Squaw Valley, Lake Tahoe, Sierra Nevada guy, and then I can definitely relate to you on that front. Man, it is a spectacular place. What would you do if you could not ski nor climb?
I think I'd dive even deeper into business, run Alpenglow Expeditions. And, there's a constant kind of battle within myself between Alpenglow and my own personal climbing and skiing. And I could so happily be 100% in that business.
This might relate well. What challenges you the most intellectually on a daily basis?
That does tie in well. It's Alpenglow. It's having a small business and trying to offer a product that I'm really proud of, and also trying to be good to the team who's actually producing that product, the guides, the office staff, my partners. It just challenges me every day, all things of small business.
What scares you the most in the mountains?
The random risks that are around all the time in the things we do, and the fact that lost so many acquaintances and friends just, I think, to the Russian roulette nature of what we do, that if we put ourselves in these really high exposed places enough times, it might be our time, our turn.
Could you give me an example of one of those objective hazards?
Yeah, so things like rock fall, ice falls, so seracs, big ice cliffs that just collapse in a random nature. Avalanches actually still have that random piece to it, right? There's a science to avalanche education and forecasting, but there's an art as well because it's just not straightforward. So those are all examples of some of those things that we have a tough time predicting.
What do you love most in the mountains?
Having a singular focus with a team or partner, having all the distractions fall away.
What's the funniest accident you've had in the mountains?
Shoot, I've had so many. Just 2 years ago, I was running a big Discovery Channel film project on Mount Everest in 2019. So my last season there, we had this huge project, so much work to do. We were really trying to be the first team up the mountain for a variety of reasons of what we were working on, the science we were trying to do there. And I made a call to leave an entire camp of equipment up. So let's say 6 tents, sleeping bags, down suits, people's boots, everything you leave at 23,000 feet. And I made a call to leave everything there so we could get down, wait out a storm, and get back quickly. And the storm ended up being like twice as powerful as we expected. And every single piece of gear was gone when we went back up there, including, imagine people's personal down suits and boots. Like, there's no more climbing without those things. And it was only funny because over a period of 3 days, the guide team and the Sherpa team searched in crevasses in a progressively larger and larger area. And we ended up finding like 90% of the equipment and continuing the expedition.
Whoa, that's insane. Because you would have felt like such a goat had that.
I was sure we could withstand the predicted winds. And we just got twice as much as we thought.
You kind of gave a good example here, but I have this written down. What's the craziest thing you've seen on Everest?
Yeah, we could just spend the next 2 hours telling stories from Everest. I've seen everything and been a part of everything from like the craziest raging parties, with people streaking naked at 21,000 feet, like,
I love it.
That's crazy. I've seen the classic things you hear about, like someone who's never put on crampons before, never been to altitude before, trying to put their crampons on backwards so the spikes are going into their boots, because that makes sense, right? Yeah, we could keep going. It's a crazy place, but I also totally love it and believe in the importance of people going there and climbing there and challenging themselves.
Well, I know you're a big advocate for it, so we'll get into more of that later.
Cool.
What's the scariest accident you've had in the mountains?
The first one that comes to mind actually was I was heli-ski guiding in Alaska, and through a series of communication breakdowns between me, my co-guide, and my pilot, we ended up getting out of a helicopter, my 6 clients, me and a co-guide. And it turns out we were on top of a cornice. The cornice broke 18 feet back as the helicopter lifted off. And me and 2 clients were on the wrong side of that break and took a 1,800-foot fall the first 200 feet over cliffs, and then through a huge avalanche runout zone. 2 people buried, a bunch of broken bones between all of us, some really bad injuries. It took a long time to get comfortable on top of around cornices again.
Wow, that is an intense, scary accident.
Again, like all of these things we could talk about the whole time. Like, I mean, such an amazing case study of decision making in the mountains and how me and my co-guide had kind of passed off like responsibility to each other, but we hadn't clarified. And then the pilot was new and had just come from Haines, and now we're in Valdez, and we didn't communicate when we had concerns, and we really fucked up.
Communication is everything in the big mountains. How many avalanches have you personally been in?
Like real avalanches, 3. One in La Grave in the trees, one in Aspen in my very first season there, and then that one I just told you about in Alaska, which was triggered by a cornice.
Which sport do you think exposes you more to avalanches, skiing or mountain climbing?
Definitely skiing, because in mountain climbing, we're often trying to avoid big storms, lots of fresh snow, things like that. We're trying to climb in the stable seasons, whereas I feel like skiing, especially big mountain skiing, like we're looking for that powder, those fresh storms, things like that. And so there's a lot more, I think, conflict potentially between safety and fun that's harder to manage. We're closer to the edge more often.
Have you ever been hurt while skiing or mountain climbing? You mentioned your injury on a cornice fall. And have you had any other injuries?
That's a good question. Not big ones. I blew out an ACL skiing in Squaw.
Who hasn't?
Had a decent 5-year period where I had 3 pretty real concussions in 5 years. 2 from skiing and 1 from climbing, getting dropped while rock climbing, like end of the rope kind of thing, like just a mistake in the belay system. But I've been pretty fortunate over time, and I've never, knock on wood, had a serious injury in the really big mountains in the Himalaya.
That's great, because ACL is so common. I blew my ACL in Japan in 2015. That's a tough one, but you're right, not a big deal. You've been skiing and climbing all over the world, expeditions, skiing and climbing both together. What were your favorite skiing or climbing expeditions?
When I finally got to start combining my love of skiing, like you asked me what my favorite thing was in the world since I was a kid, it's skiing first and
Love
foremost.
that.
It just turned out that I happened to be like pretty good at walking up really tall hills, and that's kind of where I built my career. But when those two things started to come together, so years and years of skiing in Chamonix and Le Grave and kind of steep skiing, getting used to exposure and things like that, and I got to combine that with the fact that I'm good at walking up really tall hills. So I started to try to ski 8,000-meter peaks, Manaslu first, then Cho-Oyu, then Lhotse, then Makalu twice, and Everest, then back to Cho-Oyu. Like those expeditions where I got to combine those things are absolutely my favorite trips.
Where would you not go back to?
I will not go back to K2. So climbing trip versus ski trip, but the risks, the uncontrollable risks of K2 are something that I feel very lucky to have snuck through. The mountain still has over a 20% fatality rate. So for every 5 people at summit, 1 dies. And I'm really happy to not go back there.
We're going to dive more into that too, because I just watched your movie Breathtaking, all about your climbing trip on K2, and it just bent my mind. Absolutely
Awesome.
Spectacular movie. And speaking of movies, what's your favorite ski movie of all time?
You probably, like a lot of us, I grew up with Blizzard of Oz. I've probably watched it, 100 and something times. That's the film I will always go back to.
Oh, the bomb drop in the beginning. That's when I was in college, that's what they'd wake us up to in the morning. That terrible bomb with a rollerblading down the hill. Oh, yeah. It still gives me the creeps, that part, but I love that movie. What's your favorite book? You can pick more than one.
Good. That's a great question. I didn't have an answer. I don't have an answer ready. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read a book more than once. I was trying to think, like, what have I read more than once? That would have to be the one, but I have nothing. So I'm going to go all the way back to like the book that kind of like built this foundation before I had anyone to teach me mountaineering skills or anything to take my skiing skills out of the resort. Freedom of the Hills was like my Bible. And I literally did read it cover to cover, even though loads of it didn't make sense.
I did the same thing when I was a kid. And for our listeners who don't know, Freedom of the Hills is made by the Mountaineers up in Seattle. And it's this really thick, literally Bible of how to mountain climb, essentially. How to use your ice axe, how to use crampons, how to use ropes, how to do anything you can think of in the mountains. And it really turns you on as a young person because you realize like, whoa, I can learn how to do these things. And you actually can learn quite a bit just from the book. So
yeah, I mean, I remember like going out in my backyard. I grew up in Massachusetts and like trying to use like a claw hammer and a screwdriver as ice tools and ridiculous stuff like that as you were reading it in the book.
I love it. And that's the kind of imagination that propels people to the biggest places like you've done. So that's so cool to hear that it started that way for you as well. So you survived the rapid fire round. We're going to drill down and I've got to start with Everest. It's so glaring. It's so obvious. There's no way around it. You have 8 summits of 29,000 foot Mount Everest, Earth's highest mountain. You put 13 seasons on the mountain. You've gotten over 100 clients to the top of Everest. When was your first summit of Everest? And did it just completely blow your mind, your first trip there?
Yeah, so my first season was actually 2008, but didn't summit. My first summit was 2009. And that was while guiding. So, I basically decided when I was 14 years old that my dream was to climb Mount Everest. Like I had read kind of like Reinhold and Messner books and things like that, and just really understood it as a place where people test themselves with the outcome being super unknown. And so like from 14 years old, it took me until 30, to figure out how to get there. I didn't have the money. I knew it was $65,000. That was the number everyone kind of knew after the Into Thin Air book. And I didn't have the money. So, mountain guiding was my path there. So my first time there, I was guiding. It was 2009. And, the funny thing is I had a great season. I felt great. But we summited and it was like the most scary, stressful time. Like we had a pretty windy day, so conditions were not great. You're as far away from your safety net when you get to the summit. And I had a client, this 62-year-old guy who had performed well, but he started getting cerebral edema as he was topping out. And he went downhill really quickly. And so like my first summit, I probably spent 42 seconds on the top with the expedition doctor at base camp yelling in my earpiece, like, Joe's slurring his words. He's doing this. Like, you just got to get the hell out of there and you got to go. So it was not like a joyous, cathartic, powerful experience. It was like, oh shit, like I'm going to have an accident on my first season on this mountain.
But you got him down safely.
I was just an assistant guide, a junior guide, but our team got him down safely. And it was hard work, but it's amazing what drugs like dexamethasone do, and increased oxygen rate flows, and just getting down and down and down with a really powerful Sherpa team. So I was lucky to have a lot of good support around us. And, it's kind of like another one of those experiences that, like, right away, my first season on Everest, number one, I knew I was going to come back and do it more. But number two, I just knew like how conservative I needed to be to do multiple seasons and not have an accident up there.
Give him the Dex.
Yeah.
Do you know what that movie? Do you know that movie?
Vertical Limit.
Vertical Limit. Yeah, I still talk about that all the time. That just so burned classic.
It truly is a miracle drug in this specific instance. It's also abused up there. So
interesting. So for our listeners, dexamethasone is a steroid that is often given to people who are experiencing high altitude sickness, especially like cerebral edema or pulmonary edema. And it really can, as Adrian is saying, it can really turn people around quickly. And it also, by chance, is something that's been very successful in treating coronavirus patients. So that's something that's been administered a lot recently too. So Adrian, it appears that you summited Everest not once, but twice in 2010 within 3 weeks, which is insane. And then you climbed Everest again 2 times within 3 weeks the following year in 2011. Was climbing Everest twice in 3 weeks a Herculean feat for you, or was that within your abilities?
Both of those seasons were really, really special to me, especially 2010. And it's kind of like, so 2009 kind of didn't enjoy my summit, very stressed out, got down, with everyone alive. 2010, I came back. I obviously had more experience, more knowledge. I also was lucky to have really connected with our Sherpa team through the previous years. And I just love climbing. And so in 2010, what I had the opportunity to do is not only work with my clients, but on off days when the clients were resting, I would go up and work with the Sherpa, doing things like carrying loads, even though my load's much smaller than theirs. I'd carry a tent or two while they're carrying 5 tents, or break some trail or fix some rope. And as it turned out, the Sherpa team traditionally puts the fixed rope into the summit. So on Everest, on the normal route, there's an umbilical cord of rope that goes from base camp all the way to the summit. And that's one of the things that have dramatically changed the safety of the mountain since before the 96 accident. So the into thin air, big accident. One of the big learnings that came out of that was that if you don't have a fixed rope from top to bottom, when a huge storm comes in and all communications get shut off, people can literally be 100 feet away from a tent, but they don't know that and they can't get there. So we now fix the entire mountain, and the Sherpa generally do that. And so I was invited in 2010 to go with 9 Sherpa to put up the rope to the summit. And it was just this incredible opportunity. All of a sudden I got to see the mountain with no ropes, no footprints, up with just 9 of the strongest climbers on the planet. And, they were not putting me in front because I was so strong to break trail. Like, they were stronger than me, but I had a lot of experience with technical skills and especially avalanche mitigation. And it happened to be a season with a bunch of avalanche hazard. So they asked me onto that summit day to help with the decision-making. So while I was, trying to keep up, I was also getting to be a part of that decision-making. And we stood on top on this perfect day, no wind, spent like 40 minutes on the summit of the world, the first team. And, that will probably always be my most memorable summit. And since it went so well, I got the opportunity to do it again in 2011, different conditions. But that season I was working on, we actually placed bolts up there to replace a lot of the pitons and kind of bad anchors. As the mountain's been getting busier and busier and busier, there's a lot of hazard of lots of people pulling on the same rope. And so we're trying to slowly make these changes to make it safer.
That's impressive. And how common is it for people to climb Everest twice in one season?
It's quite common for Sherpa, for the strongest Sherpa. My team now is like 25 Sherpa on an average season. And perhaps, 3 of those will join the rope fixing team along with other teams' strongest Sherpa and do this summiting twice. So it's still not common even amongst the Sherpa, but many of them, the strongest ones do it. And of course, it's been done by other, non-Sherpa Westerners. It's definitely not common though.
First went to the mountain in 2009, I think you said, or 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And then by 2016, you decided it was time to try Everest without supplemental oxygen. And the supplemental oxygen comes in a little tank, and it's something that you use generally, I think, above 8,000 meters, 26,000 feet to just make everything better. And we'll get into that again. And so in 2016, you tried without supplemental oxygen, and you failed. And I saw a quote where you said that you almost got yourself killed a few hours from the summit. What happened there?
So I had a few summits by 2016, all with supplemental oxygen, all while guiding. And what I had kind of come to realize is that because of genetic luck and how much time I spend at altitude and how hard I work, I knew when I went to Everest with oxygen, I could summit. And that was my job, right? I needed to be focusing on other people, clients, things like that. And so that whole idea of when I was 14 years old, that Everest was about the unknown and the mystery of it, I never had that. And that's why I made the decision to try without oxygen, because I knew that I probably couldn't do it. Most people who try without oxygen fail. And so I wanted to kind of have that experience my clients were having and that I had dreamed about all those years. So that's why no O's. The first year I went there, I felt super strong. I climbed it kind of like how I always do. I knew the mountain really well. I knew the route really well. I had a great partner, Corey Richards, another professional climber and photographer. And yeah, as it turns out, without supplemental oxygen, Corey gets stronger as he goes higher. And in some ways, it almost feels that way. And I get weaker. Corey's the strongest person I've ever seen up high without oxygen. And I really struggled to where we switched, right? I was always the faster one, always ahead, always getting to camp first and making a hot tea. And above like 27,000 feet, all of a sudden, Corey was pulling away from me. And I remember really struggling with it and trying to keep up with him and things like that. And I think I actually like massively bonked essentially on a summit push trying to keep up with Corey, and then starting to get so cold because I had no energy left. I hadn't kept any reserves behind. Still made it really close. I was probably 400 vertical feet from the summit, well over 28,500 feet. I got to the point where I couldn't feel my hands to behind my wrists, so I could no longer clip devices onto the fixed rope we were talking before. So then I had to solo because I couldn't use the rope, and I was still going up and I'm soloing and I can't feel my hands, and started to think about like the consequences of frostbite when I have a girlfriend who's a professional rock climber. And it still took a long time, but I did ultimately decide to turn around and got myself back down to our highest camp at 27,000 feet and put on oxygen. And I'm sure that's what saved my toes and fingers.
Well, I'm so glad you made that decision, and you came back. You came back the very next year in 2017 and achieved your goal of summiting without supplemental oxygen on Everest. But you stated that coming down was very hard that day, and you didn't end up remembering the summit. Is that right?
Yeah, so a year later, went back after a lot of training. I worked with a company called Uphill Athlete, kind of this well-known training company for climbers, Steve House and Scott Johnston, and had a year of coaching and a nutritionist and really changed a lot of things. And went back, maybe only 3% stronger and it's slightly smarter, but that was the difference. I ended up summiting, but my summit push was a 43-hour round trip push.
Whoa.
And one of the wild things is that when you're that high without oxygen, on the summit of Everest is less than 30% of the oxygen there is at sea level. And so you end up having a lot of kind of like blackouts, periods you don't remember. The wildest one, so I had a film crew with me, so actually they could prove to me all these things that I didn't remember happened.
Oh, whoa.
But, one of the wildest ones was Kilian Jornet, a very famous runner who was also summiting Everest without supplemental oxygen. We actually passed on the summit day, hugged, talked, congratulated each other. And someone told me a day or two later, wasn't it cool to see Kilian right below the summit? I was like, we didn't see Kilian. Like, no. I swore. True. And then you wind to hour 27 of the footage, and there's Kilian having a whole conversation.
I mean, it's funny now, right? But it's so
funny now.
Interesting and complicated. You must have been aghast. Oh my gosh, really? That happened?
was really happy that second year I chose to have, I knew how hard it was going to be for me after the first year. Like, it's hard for everyone, of course, but some people are better and some people are worse. And I have a ceiling at like 28,500 feet, beyond which I am really not there, really struggling. And so in 2017, I had a Sherpa with me, one of my best Sherpa partners climbing with me. And then I had this mountain guide, Topo, who works with me filming. So I actually had a good support system around me, and I knew I could go to the absolute like a muerte limit because I had the right people with me to help me get down. And that makes my ascent less pure than, let's say, Reinhold Messner in 1978, who did it without oxygen and solo. And I think we just have to like I'm still so proud of my ascent, like deeply, deeply proud and happy. But like, whenever I talk about it, I try to bring it up because I think we have to kind of acknowledge the asterisks we have next to these things to leave like the next generation. There's more. It can be done better. It can always be done better. And I think that's important.
I do too. I don't think anybody I know that would take anything away from you. And I love what you said about, blacking out. It's like when you're drinking and blacking out too. You're so glad when people recount the stories of what you were like in those blackouts. Like, oh, I was still cool. That's great. I was nice to Killian, and that's great. I didn't take a swing. I didn't take a swing at anybody. Oh man, this is all good news. It's all good news to me. And I saw another quote that you said, if Everest had been 50 feet higher, I truly don't know if I'd have gotten to the top. So, like you said, that was close to your threshold, and so congratulations.
Yeah, like that last 200 vertical feet, I think the last 200 vertical feet, like a rope length, probably took me 5 hours.
No way.
You start to like calculate out what another 50 feet might have taken.
Wow.
And, I was probably taking a step for every 2 to 3 minutes and, 40 to 50 breaths per step. And what I do remember of the day, that was probably the hardest thing, because I think I was used to in my climbing that you do see progress, like the view changes, the sight picture of your goal changes. And this last few hours was so slow that nothing changed. And it was so hard to keep figuring out how to like blast through the pain to pick the leg up one more time to take another step when it just wasn't helping. It wasn't changing things.
Wow. I never.
It was a fight for me.
And I want to reiterate that for our audience. I think you said it was a step every 1 or 2 minutes and 40 or 50 breaths per step. I mean, that is grueling. And like you're saying, the scenery is not changing. And to maintain that mental acuity to continue putting one foot in front of the other. I don't think many of us listening to this right now have ever been in a situation like that. So again, kudos. That is very impressive.
Thanks. I wanted it pretty badly.
Obviously. And at what elevation do climbers generally need supplemental oxygen? And just tell us, what exactly is supplemental oxygen?
When you go to high altitude, the air is less dense. Therefore, with every breath you take in fewer oxygen molecules that all your muscles and your brain and everything needs. And like I said, 50% of oxygen at 18,000 feet, about 30% of oxygen at the summit of Everest. But we start to get to that point where human beings can't exist anymore. Like they need more than 30%. So you're on kind of borrowed time when you're up there. And so the way most people climb 8,000 meter peaks that are over 26,000 feet tall, is with bottled oxygen. So imagine it looks like a diving tank, but it's lighter. Each bottle weighs about 9 pounds. On an average Everest summit push, you'll use 9 or 10 of those bottles through the whole climb over multiple days. And on your summit day, you'll use 3 of those bottles. So 27 pounds of oxygen on your back. And it effectively reduces the altitude of the mountain. It's not like scuba diving. You're not only breathing it, you're breathing a mixture of the outside air supplemented by a little bit from the bottle. And that's why it's called supplemental oxygen. But it reduces the height by a few thousand feet. And
by how many thousand feet? I'm sorry.
Well, it's not, it's kind of on a curve. Probably by the time you're at the summit, this might not be scientifically accurate, but it feels like it's 1,000 meters lower or something like that. So instead of 29,000 feet, it feels like 26,000 feet, which is a big difference, but it's still very high. Most people put on oxygen on mountains like Everest above 7,000 meters or 23,000 feet. So you're using it from 23 to 29, and back down again.
You can do this. You can climb high without oxygen, without supplemental oxygen. Do you think, is there something genetic or biologic about you that helps at altitude?
Yeah, for sure. And so there is definitely a genetic component to acclimatization. And there are a small segment of the population that just can't acclimatize at all, right? Like they'd go to 18,000 feet, a mountain like Kilimanjaro or something like that, and they wouldn't be able to summit. They have very severe altitude symptoms, but that's a few percent of the population. Then probably 90% of us, are in the middle where we can acclimatize, but we might do it slowly. And we might not be able to do it all the way to 29,000 feet, but we can do it pretty high. So we can summit mountains like Aconcagua, the tallest peak in South America, that's 23,000 feet tall. And then there's a few percent of people that can go all the way to the summit of a mountain like Everest without oxygen. And everyone's got this kind of like ceiling. Like I mentioned, I think mine's about 28.5. I really can't last very long above that. But an interesting thing is there's a group of climbers around the world for decades who have been trying to climb all 14 8,000 meter peaks without oxygen. That's kind of like an ultimate goal in our sport. And there are quite a few who have summited 13 of them and failed repeatedly on Everest without oxygen. So that extra 700 feet that Everest has over K2 is that different.
Wow, that is hugely significant. High altitude mountaineering, it's commonly publicly thought of as one of the most dangerous things you can do.
Yeah.
But I was doing a little research and, BBC is reporting that the death rate on Everest is now below 1%. I mean, 1% is still not great, right? How do you perceive the danger of mountain climbing on Everest and why do you do it? How do you feel safe up there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to remember, like for people considering doing something like climbing Everest, for sure the risk is not gone. Like you said, still 1%. That's a very real number. If you knew, 1% of people who were going to drive on the highway tomorrow were going to die, we probably wouldn't drive as much as we did. So it's still a very high number, but it's much smaller than it used to be. The way I perceive risk up there is you have to be willing to take risk. You have to be willing to understand there are still going to be random things that can happen that can get you killed up there, like a big storm, like an ice fall, like a rock fall. But a lot of the risk, Everest used to in the 80s have a 25% fatality rate, and now it's 1%. Whoa. That has changed through commercialization and technology. So things like putting a fixed rope from bottom to top, things like using oxygen consistently above 23,000 feet, things like having really good radio communications amongst every single person on the mountain. So, everyone's always in comms with their teammates, and things like weather forecasting. Like we now spend thousands of dollars to have a dedicated Swiss team of meteorologists predicting our weather to the hour for our summit pushes. And they've been doing it for a decade or 15 years, and they are incredible. So what used to happen, even in my first seasons there, we used to often get caught unawares up high in big storms. And while we might not get ourselves killed, you lose a massive amount of energy and resources in that situation. Now it's quite rare. Kind of like the story I mentioned in the rapid fire. It's quite rare now to get caught in a big storm up high because we have these really good models. And if we're being conservative, we should be back down the mountain in base camp where we have big, comfortable hangout tents to wait out the storm. And so those few things have made the mountain massively, massively safer.
Why is Everest worth the risk?
It's a really understandable goal for people, right? Tallest mountain on the planet. If you like hiking, then it's pretty natural to go progressively a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. That's what I did. Started off in the Northeast in New England, then Colorado, then South America, then finally Asia. Like it's a pretty natural path. And like, why climate? Like it is still unknown for most people. Like even a lot of people think clients join our teams, our commercial teams, like my company, Alpenglow Expeditions, and like they're gonna summit and it's a walk in the park. It is not. Like if you look back over the 13 years I've guided the mountain, my overall success rate with my clients is still far less than 50%. And on, 5 of those 13 years, no one summited. And so like, it is still really freaking hard. And I think there's a lot of people fortunate enough in their lives to have extra energy and time and mental space to want to try something with an unknown outcome. And that's what Everest is. It's like the biggest thing in the world with an unknown outcome.
I think that's what the human spirit's all about. Humans
Right.
did not get where we are, in the food chain and in the world by being satisfied. That is not something we do.
Right. Exactly.
Where
Right.
now it's, everybody's talking about, we got to be on Mars, it just keeps going. It will never end. And when it ends, that's a bad sign for the human race, I think.
I agree.
Overcrowding is something we've got to talk about just because the media has blown it up. And I'd love to hear, a boots on the ground perspective. Everybody knows that it's supposedly very overcrowded. Crowding's blamed for increased deaths on the mountain. You spent so much time up there. What's your perspective on overcrowding on Everest and the effects that it's having?
Again, just another topic we could do hours on, Miles. I'll try not to climb onto my soapbox about overcrowding or issues on Everest. It's obviously something I'm passionate about. So first of all, the mountain is busy. We've all seen the photos of like the big line going up the Lhotse face in Nepal and things like that. So the really short answer to what I think about overcrowding is that in 2014, I stopped climbing on the Nepali side of the mountain where all of those photos you've ever seen are from. And my team, my company, my friends, my guides, we all moved to the north side of the mountain, to the Tibetan side, where there's less than 30% of the numbers of people on the mountain because China makes it really hard to get into the country from that side and they make it really expensive. And so on that side, we have a really relatively uncrowded and pristine experience. And that's how I choose to climb the mountain. That's the first answer. Second thing I'd say, and why everyone doesn't just switch and then we're overcrowded is, again, the money, the challenges, the bureaucracy of China, and then it's considered a colder and more difficult climb. And so for people who want the easiest version, they still go to Nepal. But then the second thing is I actually don't believe the issue is too many people. The mountain is not nearly as crowded as Mont Blanc in France. It's not nearly as crowded as Denali in the United States, the Matterhorn in Switzerland. All these mountains are far more crowded. And people have figured out how to manage those crowds and have low fatality rates. Our problem on Everest is there is no standard of experience that people need. And so as less scrupulous commercial companies have come in chasing profits, they'll take anyone to the mountain. And so you're getting people who can't make decisions for themselves up there, are entirely dependent on their Sherpa, and are paying cut rate budget prices so they don't have the infrastructure around them they need. And that lack of experience and lack of infrastructure is leading to even a 1% fatality rate should no longer be the case. That's happening because of these decisions. And so I think we desperately need standards of what you have to have climbed before you go to Everest. And my company can mandate that, but no government is mandating that yet.
You are very sharp and perceptive because you just answered a slew of my next questions. You hit all that out of the park. Thank you for those answers.
Easy.
And then I've got a couple random tangents that weren't hit. How much is a permit to climb Everest?
So on the Nepali side, I think the current rate is like $12,500. On the Chinese side now, it's about $18,000. That's just the piece of paper. The cheapest you can probably go to the Nepali side of the mountain is about $25,000 today. That's 1/3 of what it was 5 years ago, and that's a big part of the problem. On the Chinese side, probably the cheapest you can go is $45,000.
Wow, so that's a big reason the Chinese side has some limitations too. How cold is it up there on summit day?
Alpenglow Expeditions, my company, we won't go if it's colder than negative 25 degrees or has more than 20 mile per hour of wind on summit day. So those are kind of our limits to where basically at that level, if something goes wrong, you have a very limited amount of time to deal with it. So someone sprains an ankle, someone loses a glove, they're going to get frostbitten or go into like hypothermia so quickly. So that's our limit.
About the same limits. I mean, temperature, we don't even get close to that. But even in a stiff wind in the Rocky Mountains, for example, if we're going to go out, I'll have a stiff talk with people and say, hey, if somebody breaks a leg today, we are in trouble. We're screwed. So yeah, that's great that you guys have those margins of safety built in. How heavy is a summit day pack for a guide versus a client?
On my team, one of the things we do is we choose to not have huge packs on our clients on summit day. We want them to focus on their climbing. So they're generally carrying 2 bottles of oxygen, which is 18 pounds, and then probably another 5 or 6 pounds of food and maybe backup mittens and water and things like that. So what does that add? 25 pounds. A Sherpa is carrying their third oxygen bottle plus their own 3 oxygen bottles plus a bunch of extra rope and gear and things like that. So a Sherpa is going to be somewhere around 50 pounds.
Wow.
And mountain guides are going to sit right in the middle of that, somewhere on the spectrum based on their strength in the day.
These Sherpa are just ubermensch, just super people. It's so impressive. I can't imagine a 50-pound pack on summit day on Everest.
Yeah.
And then one more kind of tangent question: how much gear per person is brought to Everest Base Camp in pounds? How much stuff per person in pounds does it take to get to the top of Everest?
2019, we did have a film crew, so that adds, but we had something like 24,000 pounds of equipment to base camp.
Whoa.
Now, we on the Chinese side are able to drive trucks to base camp, big dump trucks over multiple days on crazy roads, all the way to 17,000 feet. So we can have very extensive supplies at base camp, but then everything goes on yaks for a 2 days walk to ABC. So we probably bring like 9 or 10,000 pounds of stuff to ABC.
Advanced Base Camp.
Advanced Base Camp at 21,000 feet. And then it progressively gets lighter and lighter as we go up. But, it's an amazing amount of stuff. And the only way I can sort of explain it is we think of it very much in like a military operation kind of style, that I've had storms where I've lost 16 tents and everything inside of them, like had 9 feet of snow dropped on me on Manaslu and lost every single tent I had on the mountain. And my clients are paying me that when that situation happens, we don't have to go home. And so that means we've got 16 more tents and, oxygen. We're carrying 50% more oxygen than we plan on needing. So then when a team has a horrible accident and needs 30 bottles of oxygen, we can supply that. And so you just bring so much to be ready for any eventuality. And even with all of that, like I said, still 5 out of 13 seasons, we've not had anyone summit, like gone home without summit.
And that feeds really well, segues well into my next question is, what are the biggest intellectual challenges of climbing Everest?
So certainly that like logistical side, I happen to love logistics. Like when Emily and I like going to go on a vacation, like I'll plan everything. I just love it. It's the one time I like Excel spreadsheets and all the rest. And so the logistical side is a big challenge, intellectual challenge. And then I think it's like all mountain sports, it's decision-making with an incomplete picture, like not all the information, right? That's what we do every day when we go skiing or we go climbing. We have to make hard decisions that have very serious consequences, and we never have all the information, and that's constant stimulation.
I love that, because that's what it's all about. It's when you're learning new things, whatever it is that you're involved in is exciting. I know you could go on for hours on this, but tell us a little bit about the Sherpa people, who they are, what they do. It almost sounds like climbing Everest would be almost impossible without them.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly my ascent of Everest would have been impossible without Sherpa teammates. If it's with a capital S, it's actually a specific group of people that live in a valley called the Khumbu Valley below Mount Everest on the Nepali side. So when you see Sherpa with a capital S, that's kind of what it's referring to. And then the majority of Sherpa with a small s that work on the mountain come from that region, but now more and more they're coming from other regions in Nepal and also Tibet. So we have Tibetan Sherpa now. And so small s Sherpa are essentially the workers who do they're like the backbone of any expedition. They do a lot of the hard work. They're not necessarily mountain guides. So they're not necessarily making decisions about avalanche conditions and whether a client should go up or down. I would differentiate that and call those people who may be Sherpa, but they're mountain guides. And then our Sherpa are doing things like building camps, breaking trail, fixing ropes, carrying loads, doing a lot of that hard work. Yeah, I mean, some of my closest friends are Sherpa teammates that I've been working with for 2 decades now. So all of my Sherpa teammates come from one tiny little town in Nepal called Fort Say. And when I started my own company to guide on these big mountains, I was like 22, And this Sherpa friend of mine who had been working on the team was maybe like 16, but we just really connected. And so he came across with me to my company, and his name's Dorje Sonam Sherpa. He was from Fort Say. He and I have been working together for, so many decades now, or decades. He was from Fort Say, and so he started bringing in his friends and his brothers and his cousins, and that's how the best Sherpa teams work. They're really tight-knit family groups, and so I'm lucky to have this incredibly strong group that support all my expeditions.
Yeah, and it sounds like in addition to all that, it's just a really fascinating culture, which I love. So
it is, and now they're like the superheroes of Nepal as well, right? Like financially, they, I'd like to believe they're well treated. They send their kids to college internationally in general. They now mostly have like family houses in the village and also a house in Kathmandu. And they just get an incredible amount of respect, not only from us, but from the rest of Nepal, because they are just incredible athletes. And as we see them starting to do different sports and things like that, as Sherpas start to get into rock climbing, as Sherpas start to climb 8,000 meter peaks for themselves instead of just while working, they're doing incredible things, which is so cool.
Well, that's really cool insight that people just don't have access to. I'd love to hear that they're doing well, and that's all really great information. And in speaking of culture, let's switch cultures over to Pakistan, because we got to talk about your recent trip to K2. So just for our audience, K2 is Earth's second highest mountain at 28,250 feet. It's in Pakistan. You, Adrian, successfully summited it without supplemental oxygen in 2019. It's considered the world's most difficult mountain to climb. It's the ultimate achievement in mountaineering. When you see a picture of this thing, I mean, it's what a kid would draw a mountain like. It is just a triangle, but steeper than a triangle. More people have been to outer space than have stood on the summit of K2. I love that. Less than 400 people have summited. Less than 400 people have summited and survived in the 118 years of climbing K2 since it started in 1902. K2 has the second highest fatality rate of any mountain because it's so challenging, right behind Annapurna, which is also another 8,000 meter peak in the Himalaya. And somewhere around, as you mentioned before, 1 in 5 people who summit K2 perish. So it's really difficult. You did it without supplemental oxygen. Why did you decide to do it, climb K2 without supplemental oxygen?
You did your homework. That was great.
I try.
K2 was definitely something that was on my radar, and the mountain range it's in, the Karakoram in Pakistan. But I lost friends there. I knew how dangerous the place was and how different it was than Nepal and Tibet. So as I built my business, Alpenglow Expeditions, I really focused on Nepal and Tibet and never did a Pakistan trip. And in 2008, I decided not to go on a trip with a group of friends of mine to K2, kind of a fully sponsored trip. And that was the year the really big accident happened. And the team leader, Rolf, was killed in the accident. And so I hadn't gone that year. And so I basically just set it aside and was like, I'm not sure I'm ever going to go to K2. The fatality rate is so high that the risk is so uncontrollable. And so I put my focus into Everest and other things and trying to ski big peaks like we talked about and things like that. And after Everest, after 2017, after being successful, a couple of things happened. One was I started to wonder if Everest was kind of just a fluke for me without oxygen, because I knew the mountain so well. I was so dialed. I knew every inch of the route. I had some real advantages on that mountain. And so after a couple of years, I started wondering, like, what if I couldn't do it again? What if I wasn't that, what if it was, just a fluke? So that was kind of in my mind. Needing something a little bit different that wasn't where I work was something I was excited for, an adventure to a place I'd never been before. And then really it was about team. So Carla Perez and Topo Esteban Mena, two of my Ecuadorian closest friends who also guide for Alpenglow Expeditions, they decided they wanted to go to K2. And we were actually sitting just after guiding a trip on Aconcagua down in Mendoza, drinking loads of wine, celebrating, talking about 2019. And Carla was like, I'm going to go summit K2 without supplemental oxygen. Do you want to come? And like 4 hours later, 3 bottles of wine more, I was going. And it just felt so right to have the right teammates. Eddie Bauer, our sponsor, agreed to, kind of support the expedition. And I wanted to go and try. I went in with my eyes really wide open that I wasn't going to make it a decades long thing that I went back year after year for. And I didn't know if I'd climb through the bottleneck, through the really dangerous ice fall, but I knew I wanted to go and check it out and put all my skills to the test.
I love your story about partying and drinking with friends in Mendoza, Argentina. Argentina is very close to my heart. I spent the last 12 summers down there skiing in Bariloche.
Wow.
And I've been to
Yeah.
Mendoza.
So you know.
Oh, I love it. Like I transported there with you when you were telling that story. The energy and the good vibes and just, the people down there. I was with you. I don't think they could talk me into climbing K2, but I would I'd think about it under those circumstances.
It's a
but I do want to
special place.
Oh, absolutely. I do want to take one step back. We don't need to talk about it more, but just for our audience, 2008, you opted not to go on a trip. And, that 11 people died on that trip. I think it was just a bad snow year. There was avalanches, there was ice fall. My understanding is the deadliest year in K2 ever. So, you may have really dodged a bullet there. I'm so sorry about the friends that you lost there. That's just, I want to put that in our listeners' minds. That's hugely significant that you ended up not there. It's almost like not getting on a plane that crashed. So very interesting that it happened there. And you said this before, but I'll ask again, would you go back to K2?
No. Topo, who I mentioned, mountain guide, incredible alpinist in his own right. My filmer, he filmed Colin and I and created Breathtaking, this film that you can go and check out on YouTube.
Such a good movie.
K2. He filmed all of the footage above base camp. And he basically, this was his opportunity to recon K2 for his own no oxygen attempt, which he'd like to climb a new route on the mountain. That's his dream. And so at the end of the season, as we were again, partying in Istanbul, as you do to celebrate a big expedition, he asked me if I would go back to be part of his support team on the mountain. And then I knew, and I still feel strongly today, that I'm not willing to take on the random risk that I felt on that mountain another time. I really do feel like there's a big part of luck that goes into that mountain. That's why Alpenglow won't guide it, even though it's a huge opportunity in the business to start taking people to that mountain now that I've summited it and know it. But yeah, the reason the fatality rate is still so high, despite commercialization, despite all fixed ropes, despite modern weather forecasting, is the really high amount of random rockfall and icefall that happens on the route that you're forced to climb underneath. And the only thing you can do to minimize that risk is climb faster. And certainly without oxygen, that's an impossibility. That's just not something I'm willing to take on again.
And my understanding is the bottleneck is one of the most challenging, dangerous objective hazards. You're basically hiking under a 400-foot ice serac. And what was really interesting in the movie Breathtaking was that it sounds like a climber with supplemental oxygen could climb through that zone in about 2 hours, where it takes people without oxygen, without supplemental oxygen, 6. So you're tripling your exposure to objective hazard. And that must really wear you out as well, just knowing that's where you're at.
It does. So the bottleneck is so high on the mountain. So it's when you're at your slowest, right?
How high?
You're above 27,000 feet or 27.5. It's really high.
That's high.
And you imagine a perfect hourglass couloir setup, something you'd love to ski if you're in the mountains, except it's capped by this ice fall. So this serac, this ice cliff that's constantly being pushed over from above. So just cracks, just riddled all through it. And chunks fall off of it every couple of days, I'd say. It goes out to a big plateau below the couloir, and you're walking for an hour. You're walking across this flat plateau before you get into the couloir, and you're walking through this plateau, and there's anywhere from microwave-sized blocks to Tahoe cabin-sized blocks of ice. So you're weaving your way through. So you start with an hour of thinking about there's only one place this shit came from, and it's right there. And now you're going to go up this couloir, and when it falls, it wipes everyone out that's inside it. And that was the 2008 accident.
God, so the evidence is right in your face. You're not walking into it blind. What's the craziest thing that happened to you and your team on K2?
Probably the craziest thing that happened to our team on K2 is it was the busiest season ever on the mountain. Commercialization is really growing there. As Everest has gotten busier and has gotten more successful, now the dream is to climb K2 from many clients. That's now the ultimate. And so there are companies now starting to offer that, because if there's people willing to pay for it, there's companies willing to offer it. And so this season on the mountain, there were over 200 climbers, when previous seasons there had never been more than 60. So we were so worried about the number of people and crowding, and the campsites that are safe from avalanches are so small, and how it was all going to work. And the craziest thing that happened is kind of like 5 weeks into the season, a number of the commercial teams tried to go to the summit and found really, really dangerous avalanche conditions. Not the bottleneck, but actually the slope above it was really loaded. 90 to 95% of the climbers went home and left just 2 teams on the mountain, a climber named Nims and his team, and then me, Kala, and Topo. And that was it. And we had this unbelievably pristine mountain, a tiny group of climbers working together. And as it worked out, a huge wind event that stripped the upper mountain of snow and took away that avalanche risk. So, it was just unbelievable luck. It was a willingness to wait and be patient, I think, is important, but it was also luck.
That is amazing. The luck is huge there, which it often is in mountain climbing. And again, guys got to watch this movie, Breathtaking. It documents all this, and it's absolutely fascinating. Having climbed K2 and seen how dangerous it is and how challenging it is, what do you think of Andre Bargil's ski descent from the summit of K2?
Andre is success. So he skied K2 without supplemental oxygen, and obviously the first complete ski descent from the summit. And he was a relative unknown to a lot of ski mountaineers outside of like Eastern Europe. I think it's a generational change. The thing I compare it to is like Alex Honnold free soloing El Cap, because previous to Andre's ski, like all of the highest mountains were being skied with supplemental oxygen. That's how I've done all my ski descents and all my attempts. Like when I was making that level of decision making and knowing that I was going to be probably making a whole lot of jump turns in exposed terrain, I knew I was going to use supplemental oxygen. And Andre's just like completely moved the bar, right? Like now that the hardest one probably has been done without supplemental oxygen, we as professional athletes have to ask ourselves, like, are we going to meet that new, more pure style? And the fact that his brother caught it all on drone, like so many things were like firsts of that trip. It blew my mind.
It's insane, man. I just watched the video again. It's terrifying to watch. I dislike the POV footage of it because it's too real.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather watch the drone footage because at least can get a little bit more perspective of what's going around. Realize, God, when you're the person skiing, you're just looking through this tiny little pinhole in your head, and you have so little, awareness what's going on. But he did, and his team was so strong.
Yeah. And I remember. I guess this is just how it is. I remember like shit talking on the forums at the time, like when people saw some of the footage, like he side slipped the mountain, he didn't ski it. It is so unreal what he did. Like every turn cost him so much, every single jump turn in that type of terrain. And like, will it be done better one day? Maybe. But what he did was just completely like mind altering.
I agree. And then when you hear his breathing too, that doesn't help. You realize he's just like, he's breathing so hard because it's so much work and it's so challenging and it's so steep and exposed and just, it doesn't get any crazier than that. I'll be very impressed if someone takes the bar up from there, because I don't know where the bar can go from there. It's just awesome. So, and you've been to both these places. This is a kind of a bizarre question, but which place is more visually dramatic, K2 or Everest?
They're both absolutely insane. Like standing on top of Everest, you're truly the tallest point on the planet. Like you think you can see the curvature of the earth. Yeah, it's unreal. It's the most special place on the planet in my world, right? For me. So, but with that said, K2, you're in the more jagged mountain range. It just is so rowdy. You're looking at like Trango Tower and Nameless Tower, these, 21,000 foot peaks that have rock walls twice the size of El Capitan. It's like nothing else.
I'd love to just go base camp in K2 and look at that. Look at that damn thing. I need to.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. Like I said, Alpenglow isn't going to run K2 trips because we don't think we can manage the risk effectively to call it mountain guiding. But we're starting to run K2 base camp treks this year because my mind was blown on the trek alone. Like 11 days of like rowdy, hard trekking, 6 days on a glacier, looking at the most beautiful mountains in the world.
All right, sign me up. I'm in for
Yeah,
that
you're
one.
in.
I'm in. I mean, that was a quick sell.
It'll be a Snowbrains adventure.
Oh man, absolutely! I would love to see all that. It's been a dream of mine. So, ski mountaineering. You were the very first person to ski off 26,781 foot Manaslu. Is it sixth or eighth highest peak? I might have written this down wrong.
It's the eighth tallest peak in the world.
Eighth tallest peak in the
And
world.
again, it's a mountain that I was lucky enough to have like this really intimate relationship with. So I was before I switched to guiding Choyu, a safer 8,000 meter peak. Manaslu was like the one we were prepping people for Everest on. So I did 4 seasons in a row on Manaslu. My first 3 were just climbing, not skiing. But as I was doing those, I was just seeing that it gets a massive amount of snow, which is good and bad, a lot of avalanche hazard, but really good skiing a lot of the time based on where it is in Nepal. And I was seeing other groups, other people were skiing on the mountain, and the mountain had been skied, 95% of it from this false summit that's maybe, 150 vertical feet lower. But the final 150 vertical feet of this wild exposed knife edge ridge with cornices in a lot of seasons wouldn't be skiable. And in 2011, I had the opportunity to actually guide a Russian ski client, this guy, Sergei Baranov, this incredible skier, former World Cup downhiller that now lived in Chamonix, and he wanted to start skiing big mountains. And we started in like 2009 skiing all over the world together. And Manaslu was one of the big ones we went to ski. We had a good season. We had some avalanche hazards, some pretty unique stuff, but he ended up going to the false summit and leaving his skis there and climbing to the top with me. And had this perfect day with Sherpa support. So I asked him how he felt about me skiing from the true summit. He was great about it. He had 2 kids and a wife, and he decided it wasn't for him. But he was pretty fired up for me to try it. And I had George Sonam, my Sherpa, with me that I mentioned. And so he actually belayed me off the top. So the first 2 turns I made down this very steep exposed side off the summit were actually on a rope. And I found it was edgeable. It was the conditions I need. And then I was able to unclip from the rope and ski down to Sergey, meet up, and then ski together the rest of the way.
Well, I was going to ask you for the most pivotal moment, but that must have been it. Wow. Wow, that's so intense. And I've looked at pictures of this mountain. Look it up. Look this mountain up. It is
beautiful
big.
mountain.
It is gorgeous. And it looks terrifying to me. And I kind of think that's it for me. I can no longer call myself a big mountain skier. That is real big mountain skiing.
It's big mountain. It's big mountain for sure. But I mean, some people would barely, we were joking about it with K2, but some people would barely call it skiing, right? Sometimes I call it technical descending with skis on. I'm willing to use a rope when I need to use a rope. There's a lot of side slipping going on. There's a lot of picking through rock bands going on. This is not what we want to go and do at Squaw, right? It's
right.
As far away from that as you can imagine. So yeah, it's technical descending with skis on.
Well, I'll let those armchair quarterbacks take a game off, because that is skiing. That is just doing that with skis on at those elevations and those conditions. It's insane. High elevation skiing is very challenging. The conditions are almost never good. And
That's right.
And you're the only American who's done 3 complete ski descents from 8,000 meter peaks. And again, 8,000 meters, about 26,000 feet. Which peaks are those?
Once on Manaslu, the trip I was just telling you. And then I've actually skied the 6th tallest mountain in the world, Choyu, twice. And
wow.
I'd say the reason for that is it's probably the best one to ski in that it has relatively little objective hazard, except for its extreme altitude. They're generally moderate slopes, 30-ish degrees, not a lot of cliff bands to get through. So you can put your skis on the summit and ski the entire mountain without a lot of shenanigans with ropes. And so I skied it for the first time with Sergei Baranov, the same Russian client. And then Emily Harrington, my partner, and I decided to go back and try to see if we could do an entire 8,000 meter peak ski expedition in less than 2 weeks. So we pre-acclimatized at home and had this wild plan, waited for perfect conditions on the mountain, which we were getting reports from the guided Alpenglow group. So we knew when the mountain was going to be perfect. We just pulled the trigger, went over, never really acclimatized. Topped out, skied in perfect conditions, actually had real powder skiing for 4,000 feet of the 7,000 foot descent or whatever it was. We just got so lucky. So that's how I ended up with 2 ski descents to that mountain. And then I've tried a few others. Lhotse before Jim and Hillary did it. Terrible conditions, successful, ended up summiting, but left the skis behind. And have tried Makalu, the 5th tallest mountain in the world, twice now. And that's really a big dream one. There are only 2 8,000 meter peaks left without a ski descent from the summit. Makalu is one, and Kanchenjunga, the 3rd tallest mountain in the world, is the other. So those are high up there dreams.
Well, that's my next question. What's the next big peak for you? And I think you alluded pretty clearly that you want to do those unridden ones. That would be something. So Alpenglow Expeditions, you founded your own guiding service. We talked about it a little bit in 2004. It's blossomed into a thriving company, very well respected and esteemed. What sets Alpenglow Expeditions apart from other guiding services?
The easiest answer is the people, right? Like I've been lucky enough to just have this incredible team that's come together to guide trips, both locally and abroad. And Logan Talbot, who you probably know, is one of my partners in the business now. He runs kind of everything out of Tahoe and really helped develop the local program. And he's just built this guide team of amazing humans. And I think people feel that on their trips, and it brings them back over and over and over again. So, the team is the easiest answer to that. And then we also kind of have these pillars, these things that are really important to us. So one is that every trip has an educational aspect to it. We don't drag people to summits. We don't just take people to the POW, like skiing. Like there's an educational side. Our guides are teachers. We want people to become competent members of a backcountry team or a mountain team. That doesn't mean they have to be able to run their own trips to Denali one day, but that they're involved in the decision-making, building skills. And if the shit hits the fan one day, they're going to be a team member that can help instead of hinder. And that is a foundation of everything we do.
I love that. When I'm guiding, I always really push my clients to harass me and ask a million questions. And I always say, hey, I work for you. This is the relationship that's happening right now. And then when I have friends who go on guiding trips, I always tell them, ask a million questions, harass that guide, crack their head open and pull out the knowledge, get something out of this. What's your number one goal at Alpenglow Expeditions?
To introduce more people to like human-powered play in the mountains. That's it.
That's great. And what do you think the future of Alpenglow Expeditions looks like?
I think we'll continue to grow. The international program is actually quite difficult to grow. We still probably have 8 guides guiding all 40 trips around the world. The lead guides are one of 8 people. And I think that maintains the safety and the standard. And they're like my closest friends. And we've been working together for years. And so that team can grow to 9 guides or 10 guides or 11 guides, but it's not going to explode to 50 guides. And so I don't see the international program growing much, much bigger than it is. I love the size that it's at. I love the trips that we run. Where I think Alpenglow will grow is like, we want to be able to offer more in the United States, more places for people to kind of enter the sport, to feel it. That's why we built the Via Ferrata in Squaw. That's why we do so much basic avalanche education in the winter. We want to give openings for more people to try what we love. And I think local makes sense.
Absolutely. I love that answer. And because I really do think that's one of the keys to sustainability in the mountains and in the wild places is just getting people interested, getting people hooked. And then we all end up being advocates for these amazing wild places. So let's jump into your IFMGA certifications and the process there. And my favorite word on the pin is Bergführer. Which is German, Bergführer is German for mountain leader.
Mountain guide.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you started climbing at 7 years old. You completed your first 20,000 foot peak in Ecuador at 17 years old. And this progressed into you becoming a professional mountain climbing, a fully certified international guide. When did you start getting your international guide certifications? And what was that process like?
Yeah, so the guiding certification, the international process has been around basically forever in Europe since the 1800s. But the United States was very new to it. We didn't join the International Federation of Mountain Guides Associations, the IFMGA, until 1997. And I began my guiding in kind of the mid 90s. And I had this incredible mentor named Chris Warner, who owned a guiding company and ultimately climbing gyms on the East Coast. And he was sort of anti the European system. And so for the first decade of my climbing, I didn't do any certification. I just learned, went on expeditions, and kept building that way. And then ultimately in 2004, like you mentioned, I decided to start Alpenglow. And I really wanted to differentiate myself from the company I had been working for a decade. I was starting my own thing. And so I decided to check out certification. And I took one 20-day course, kind of the first step of the whole certification process. And immediately I knew like how much I could grow as a guide with different perspectives and different mentors. And so I kind of dove all in and did my full certification in 3 years, traveling, doing a lot of my courses in Canada, a lot in France and Chamonix and Le Grave, and then some in the United States. And I finished my certification in 2007. And it definitely made me a better guide.
Wow, but that's amazing that you did it in 3 years is incredible. And my understanding is it's very difficult, process. And there's only somewhere around 130 fully certified international mountain guides in the USA.
That's right. Yep, that's right. It's generally like a 5 to 7 year process. I was lucky to be able to kind of go all in. I was still, like I mentioned, I was like valeting cars and catering dinners to kind of afford it. So working in Aspen, making as much money as I could, and then doing this guide certification process and still guiding international trips when I could, starting my business. That's kind of how I do things, like expedition style. When I go into something, I go all in and I like one focus. And that's how I took on that certification. And I'm really glad I got it. And now Alpenglow kind of one of the ways we differentiate ourselves. Like I'm a real believer in certification as well as experience. And Logan is a fully certified IFMGA guide like I am. We run the business together. So now we require certification of our guides, at least in the discipline they're working in. So if you're rock guiding, you need your rock certification. If you're ski guiding, you need your ski certification to be a lead guide of any of our programs. And then the goal is before you move into the international program, the really big trips, you have your full IFMGA certification.
I think that's fantastic. Let's switch really quick into climate change, because I love talking to people like you that have been all over the world and you've seen all kinds of things and you've seen potentially climate change. And so climate change is starting to affect our snow sports, less freeze days, warmer temperatures, shorter winters. What evidence of climate change have you seen in your lifetime?
The evidence of climate change in these big mountains that we go to has been dramatic, especially in a lot of the equatorial countries that we go to, like Ecuador, like Tanzania, things like that. And so there are mountains today that I walk on rock moraines an hour and a half to 2 hours longer before accessing the glacier than I did 20 years ago when I started in this sport. The glaciers are just so dramatically receding, especially in countries like Ecuador, Peru, Tanzania. And that's a big part of why, I kind of hounded Protect Our Winters until they finally let me join the ambassador team, because it was something I wanted to put energy into and felt like I had very direct stories of what I was seeing. So that's the biggest change. The other big thing I've seen is like this weirding of weather. In past decades, I really felt like I could predict storm cycles. I could know when like the good weather window was going to come on Everest and things like that. And now stuff is just bouncing around like crazy. And so I think that's another symptom of climate change.
I like to call it global weirding, which I agree with you. It's just erratic, it's sporadic, and it's well documented. What do you think has to happen to see real change in the fight against climate change?
I mean, I really think small individual actions are important because they can make us feel like we're on the same team and we're trying to do things. But really, I think we need governmental action and industry action. And so advocacy is a big place where Protect Our Winters now puts its energy, and where I put energy is like we need to persuade our leaders to change policy. And if they're not willing to, we need to persuade people to vote them out and vote people who will in.
I agree. I think it really has to happen on a governmental scale. What's next for you? You've done so much already, but it's got to be exciting for you to think about what's next. What's next?
Of course, 2019 has been a really difficult year. I've been very lucky. Alpenglow has survived and even thrived in some ways in the local programs. and I should have said 2020. It's been a hard year with COVID. I think I said 2019.
It's all right. It's such a hard year. It's hard to remember the number.
I've been lucky to live in a place like Tahoe and to be able to keep training and things like that. But, the big things that are coming up is hopefully Alpenglow expeditions being able to internationally guide again. We've been shut down for a year. It's been brutal from a revenue standpoint, but also like this is the longest I haven't left the country since I was a kid. And so I do really cherish my experiences internationally and with different people and with my teams. And I want to get back after that. Getting Alpenglow back into the international world. I'm planning on guiding a trip to Ecuador in February for Alpenglow expeditions. And then Emily and I kind of have a big dream trip this summer to go back to Pakistan. On my way to K2, we saw a mountain called Nameless Tower, this dream peak that's got a 6,000-foot rock wall on it that's south-facing and tops out at 21,000 feet. And we're going to go try and free climb a big route on it together, kind of using her incredible rock climbing skills and my expedition and altitude experience.
Wow, I hope that's well documented.
And that's the plan.
Okay, good. I would sign on to watch all of that. That sounds phenomenal. You guys are both just such incredible people. Then I got a quick question because this always comes up. I got a question from Facebook, and so you're about 40 years old. Is that correct?
44.
44 years old. So you're 44 years old. You've been climbing, skiing, decades, big lines. How's your body holding up?
I've been really lucky. My body is holding up well. So, I've had an ACL injury, but recovered well. And, overall, I don't have the aches and pains that I think a lot of my, a lot of pro skiers do, at least pro skier friends do.
Oh, gosh.
With that said, I am noticing even 5 years ago, I didn't think about nutrition. I didn't think about sleep and rest and how much I drink at night and all these things. And the big difference I'm finding is if I want to recover and if I want to play hard the next day, I just need to be smarter. So, I wear a Whoop band now. I track everything. I don't eat nearly as much crap. And so it maybe is a little less fun, but I hope I'm extending that tail of how long I can do these things I love for.
And are you doing any different training now?
Yeah, well, specifically right now, I'm training really hard for rock climbing as well as skiing, and they kind of have polar opposites. So that's kind of interesting, trying to build strength and muscle and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm doing, it sounds silly. I'm doing a lot more stretching. It's actually yoga, but I don't call it yoga because I don't do yoga, or in my head I don't. But those are the type of training things I find I need, more stretching or yoga and more strength training and core work and things like this that I think just keep everything working better. It used to be all I did was cardio and endurance. That's all I did. And now I've really had to shift.
I love that because I stretch quite a bit. I'm 42 years old myself. And when people catch me stretching, they always say, "Oh, are you doing yoga?" I have no idea how to do yoga. This is what I learned when I was 14 years old on basketball, my high school basketball team.
And you're still doing it.
That's literally the same routine and it works. Stretching is so good. So I do think, as we all get older, anytime in your life, I'm hooked. One of my last questions is around the COVID silver lining. I think that there's so many dark things, but there's also all these really incredible silver linings around the coronavirus and the experience we're all going through. What do you think has been a silver lining, or what do you think will be a silver lining in the kind of the coming ski season?
I think a silver lining specifically in the ski season, which, has its own challenges, but is the incredible increase of the number of people wanting to check out the backcountry. Again, we can look at the forums and see lots of people complaining about that, right? More people on the playground. But to me, it's how we're going to, grow this group of people that want to protect these pristine places and that feel that joy and bring it back into their lives. Obviously, my whole life as a guide has been trying to get more people out there. As a storyteller of these experiences is to get more people out there. And so, I absolutely want to own that. We're responsible, all of us, we're responsible for more people wanting to go and do what we love because we've been sharing it. And that's a good thing. And so a silver lining, I think, is more people are going to experience that and hopefully get the right education and be conservative and things like that and build more people doing what we love.
I agree. It's what we spoke about before, creating more ambassadors, more advocates for these incredible wild places we have. And I really want to thank you for being a great ambassador and a great advocate for all these wild places and all this storytelling. So I even took a guy backcountry skiing today who had never been, really backcountry skiing before. And he was just freaking out. I remember he kept saying, "This is like heli-skiing." And I remember I looked at him, I was like,
yeah.
I looked at him, I said, no. This is way better than heli-skiing, man. This is awesome. Heli-skiing has all these rules and all this stuff going on. We can do whatever the hell we want out here.
How much stress, how much fuel are we burning?
Totally. I was like, yeah, heli-skiing is not as good as this. This is way better. So again, thank you for all that. Adrian, that's all I got for you. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to kind of share here at the end of the show?
No, I really appreciate a great conversation. Yeah, I just love doing these things and getting to chat and talk about experiences and stuff like that. So thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate your attitude, your energy, and your time very much. So thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of the day. And I hopefully we'll go skiing again this winter, or we'll go skiing for the first time this winter.
That sounds good. Let's both get back to Tahoe soon.
Absolutely. To learn more about Adrian Ballinger and his guide service, Alpenglow Expeditions, and their incredible trips all over the world, please visit alpenglowexpeditions.com. This episode was edited by Robert Wilkinson. The music was done by Chad Crouch. I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark.